Starting off with number 10 now, we have The Smiler. This story comes from Reddit user Blasphemous Mushrooms, and it's about his friend Tom. Tom was a new police officer who had been given late night shifts. He never came across anything too strange on his patrol, but this night was different. He was by a local park, checking there was nobody doing anything suspicious there late at night. As he walked around the outskirts of the woods, he saw a man standing with his back facing him on the edge of the darkness. Tom yelled out to the man, "Hey, you! What are you doing? Come over here right now." The man turned round and gave him a blood-curdling smile. Then he ran into the woods. Without even thinking, Tom chased after him. The smiling man was leaping over branches and ducking under fallen trees like a pro. It was almost inhuman. He was on another level. Eventually, he stopped in a clearing in the forest. He smiled and then kept running. Finally, they reached a clearing in the woods. Tom was exhausted and only just managed to even look up. The man had stopped. He turned around, smiled, and then began to walk slowly back into the woods again. Tom chased, but the man was gone. It was like he had just vanished into thin air. To this day, he swears this wasn't a normal criminal. He had an experience with a sinister paranormal being. Next to number 9 now, we have The Kidnapping. This one comes from Dr. Jim Danger, who said that when he was 18, he and his friends took a trip to the Apalachicola Forest in Florida. They drove deep into the woods so they wouldn't be disturbed by any park rangers. On the very first night, they decided to do some exploring. Almost immediately on their walk, they started seeing signs that someone had been there before them. Big bags of trash were strewn everywhere. They came across a campsite with a van. There were clothes strung up on a line, coolers around the area, and a big golden retriever. They tried to back out, but then an old man stepped out and greeted them. He was friendly and chatted to them for 10 minutes about where they were from before they went on their way. Something didn't seem quite right with him. 2 months after the trip, a friend called him and told him to turn on the news. It showed an old guy with a van and a golden retriever. His name was Gary Michael Hilton, and he had just been convicted of at least 4 murders. He had kidnapped and murdered a girl in Georgia, an older couple in North Carolina, and a girl in the very same park they had been in not long after they left. They called the police and ended up actually helping them with the investigation that sent the murderer to prison. At number 8 now, we have The Mountain Man. This one comes from Reddit user CMurder4000. He's a geologist who said that he did his graduate fieldwork in Nevada. He was way out in the middle of nowhere when he saw a hand-built shack in the distance. A mountain man stepped out and looked at him. He panicked and went away. A while later, he was in a nearby area when he walked up to what looked like some kind of farm. When he got closer, he could smell the strong scent of marijuana. It was an outdoor weed farm. As he turned to get out of there, he was confronted by a man with a gun. The man offered him $10,000 to not report what he had seen and let him go. He agreed, but he never collected the $10,000 or even reported it, saying he was too scared to do either.
Badlands National Park, located in South Dakota, is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the United States. Many visitors and park rangers have reported paranormal activities in the park, including ghostly sightings and eerie sounds. The area is known for its rugged terrain, deep canyons, and eroded rock formations, which have become the perfect setting for various ghost stories. It is also home to a dark history of violence and tragedy, leading to many rumors of possible paranormal activity. The area was once a haven for outlaws and bandits as well, who would often take refuge in the rugged landscape. It's rumored that the spirits of these notorious criminals still haunt the park, with visitors reporting strange noises, apparitions, and just feelings of being watched. Visitors have also reported strange lights and unexplained sounds and eerie shadows within the park. The Deer Head. A ranger at Yellowstone National Park posted the following story on Reddit. They stated that they had been exploring the remote Lamar Valley, situated miles away from the nearest road and the park boundary. While wandering on the trail, the ranger came across a bizarre sight: a perfectly severed deer head in the middle of the path. There was no evidence of blood, and the head seemed to be untouched and intact. The person had previously come across the kills of bears and wolves, and even tracked the kills of cougars in South Dakota, but this was something else entirely. The head was of a doe and didn't have antlers, so kind of unlikely that it was a hunter committed this act, and it didn't make sense for someone to even leave the head in the middle of the trail. Just a perfectly severed, intact head. Yeah. pretty weird. Next up, we have the booby trap. In April 2012, a U.S. Forest Service law enforcement officer named James Schaufler was on patrol in a popular recreation area located off Big Springs Trail in Provo Canyon, Utah. While on foot, he came across what looked to be a tripwire, and to his horror, he discovered a primitive booby trap that was set to activate when said tripwire was crossed. The vise was made of a large rock and had sharpened sticks on it, forming kind of like a spiked ball that of course could hit an unsuspecting person and cause some serious harm. After dismantling the trap, he found another tripwire designed to send someone falling into a bed of sharpened wooden spikes, very Mortal Kombat style. Schaufler's quick thinking and sharp eyesight prevented a potentially very serious incident from happening, as the booby traps were located only half a mile from the recreation area's parking lot. It was fortunate that no one was injured, especially since there was a child's birthday party being held in the area at the time. Yikes. The traps were dismantled, and Schaufler's actions were instrumental, obviously, in keeping people safe while enjoying the area's natural beauty. Thank you, James. The next story comes from us to another Reddit user, Shiny Brian, who picked quite the spot to relieve himself. He had a job fighting forest fires in the Pacific Northwest and described his scariest encounter as such. My scariest wilderness encounter was about 2 a.m. while maintaining a fire line on a 300-acre fire caused by a lightning strike. I needed to take a number one, and the rule is you don't take a number one on the fire. So I walked over towards a stump outside the fire line. I was about 50 feet away from the stump when it walked away. It was a black bear. I feel like I would have just shrunk into myself if this ever happened to me. I mean, just seeing a stump you were looking at move, first of all, is scary, and then to see it's a bear, yeah, no thanks. Alright, Lake Crescent in Olympic National Park is steeped in legend and ghost stories. One of the most popular legends surrounding the lake is that it was created when part of Mount Storm King fell onto a battlefield, crushing the combatants and creating the bed of the lake, according to legend anyway. However, a more recent and factual story is that of the Lady of the Lake. In 1940, the body of a woman was found floating in the lake. Her body was eerily well preserved, likely due to the natural process of saponification, which gave her skin a kind of waxy texture. The woman was later identified Haley Latham Illingworth, a local tavern server who had disappeared in 1937. Her husband, Monty, was identified as the culprit after authorities found strangulation bruises on her body. Despite the mystery being solved, though, visitors to the area still report seeing the ghost of her lingering on the shores of Lake Crescent, making it one of Washington's most haunted trails, supposedly. Next up, we have the bear attack. Jordan Carberry, a Canadian park ranger in Bella Coola, British Columbia, had come across some bear cubs in a tree. Never a good sign. You do not want to come across grizzly bear cubs in the wild, as cute as they are, because where they are, the mother is close by, and she does not want to see you. And this was no exception. One of these cubs happened to fall out of the tree and caught the attention of the protective mother bear, who began charging towards him. The grizzly bear tackled him from behind, picked him up by his head. Bear then picked him up again by his thigh and dropped him down repeatedly. Using what he had learned from a defensive training class, though, the park ranger, Carberry, kicked the bear in the face as hard as he could and managed to create enough space to run back to his house. Since he didn't have cell service, though, Carberry actually had to drive himself to the hospital with one arm over his belly, just telling himself repeatedly not to pass out. Despite his injuries, Carberry did recover, and during recovery was quoted as saying he felt fan-freaking-tastic. So, amazing. The last story here, this is a personal story, at least one that happened to a buddy of mine. I call it the Waving Man. So my buddy used to be a camp counselor. So yeah, not a park ranger, but hey, close enough. Anyway, he took kids out on portaging trips. It used to be like days-long trips. We'd canoe, and then you'd traverse through the forest with the canoe, and then you'd canoe again. That's what it's called. Anyway, so one day they're canoeing, they're getting to their next site, and they happen across this man on the side of the shore, and he's kind of asking my buddy, hey, where are you guys camping and all this stuff? And my buddy Max, he doesn't really tell him because obviously he's got kids with him. He doesn't want some guy coming around their campsite. But they make it to their campsite that night. They set up the fire, they set up their tents. The kids go to bed. Him and his fellow camp counselor are in their tent. And then they start to hear what sounds like footsteps kind of walking around their campsite. And they're thinking like, okay, maybe it's one of the kids who's up or something like that. Unzip their tent, nobody. Totally empty campsite. Now they're obviously a little bit freaked out, right? Zip up the tent again. They hear those footsteps once again. They're like, do you hear that? Yeah, like I hear there's something. And keep in mind, they got kids with them, so they have to, obviously protect the kids. Buddy Max pulls out an axe he had with them, set up a fire, and they just stay up all night, just waiting for whoever this is to come out, or, might have to use that axe. They were really freaked out. Anyway, night goes by fine, no one ends up showing up. Head back on their canoes the next morning, and as they're heading down the river, they see that same man they met the day before just on the side of the shore, just waving and smiling at them. So, I don't know. Anyway.
At number 10, we have Project Amber. Project Amber is a very interesting travel channel. It follows Lance and his dog as they take a camper van through a lot of the UK and some of Europe. It's an interesting perspective to see how you can get by on very minimal resources. Now, for the most part, this is just a regular travel channel, but on one episode he runs into something very strange. He's driving through the woods in France and stops at a place to camp. He's doing a video breakdown and his dog keeps staring at an old locked up well, as if there's someone standing there. Lance is a little freaked out by this but keeps on doing the video. Later, when the cameras were off, he was approached by a bald woman wearing no shoes walking through the forest. He tries to speak to her, but she doesn't communicate, and then she continues walking into the woods. He tries to follow her to see if she's okay, but then she's gone. It's endless woods for miles, so who knows where she could have gone. And then later, he sees this.
I'm gonna leave.
The girl's running through the woods alone. Well, this is enough to get Lance freaked out, so he hightails it out of there and heads to a location which is over 50 miles away to leave this creepy mystery forest lady behind. At number 9, we have Mexican Fire Ghost. If you're going for a nice drive through a Mexican forest at night, you know how you casually go on night drives through the woods? Well, this might happen to you. Turns out in the forest of Texcla, there is a flaming ghost that wants to eat your soul. Let's have a look. Now that's one of the scariest things I've seen in my whole life. I think I'm gonna have nightmares about that for 30 years. Apparently this ghost had popped up several times before they caught it on video. I don't know if this burning phantom really wants to eat your soul, but there's no way a flaming specter can be good for the environment. Think of the forest fires. Oh. At number 8, we have Yeti. Russian dashcam videos are literally the best thing in the world. They capture everything. You see gunfights, explosions, car crashes, and now footage of a mythical beast walking through the snow. Let's check it out. Imagine seeing that running around in the wild. I would hope that it isn't like eating people because we're like cousins or something. Aren't we related to Yetis? I don't know if they're real. But these guys are super freaked out, obviously, because they just saw something that most people think don't exist. I don't know what they're saying because it's in Russian, but if anyone cracks the code, please leave it in the comments below. By crack the code, I mean if anyone speaks Russian.
7. Phantom Stairs. So this story of stairs is from user Pope_Fenderson_2 on Reddit. 4 years ago, this person left a story from an experience they had as a child. They were out with older relatives in bright daylight when they spotted stairs about 60 yards away and walked towards them until they were about 20 feet away. They said the stairs were made of wood, clean and polished with no dust and no leaves, kinda weird, and once they were that close, the light around them got dimmer and they looked back at their family. But their family looked much farther away than they actually were, and then a feeling of sheer terror hit them, so they just ran back. Once they got back to their family and told them what happened, they looked back, gestured, and the stairs were gone. When this poster's uncle heard the story, he became stern, saying, "There are things that appear different every time, these stairs or anything else, and these things lead to the spirit world, so avoid them." After this occurrence, the commenter lays down medicine and says a prayer of protection, then gets away whenever they see these stairs, and they recommend smudging yourself at the end of the day if you come across these things yourself. If you aren't worried or anything, at least, sage and smudging, it smells good, so it's never a bad idea. But on to number 6, waterproof stairs. From Melandon on Reddit, also 4 years ago, they went on a hike in the Cascades when he found 6 carpeted wood steps out in the woods and decided to investigate. It had begun to rain, but he wasn't fazed. And he kind of felt they were odd, but when he went up to them, the world kind of tilted slightly and sounded different. Like tinny different. And then as he went to step on the bottom step, he found himself not wanting to, and then sat down on the steps instead. Then he kicked off his boots and stepped on the carpet in his socks, which was oddly clean, but even more strange, it was dry. It had been raining for a while at this point, so that was kind of odd. And then he walked to the top of the stairs in his socks, and he described it as if the sound shifted even more, as if like the sound was forming to a point, and then he stood there, was like, and went back down and left. So nothing bad happened, but it was a strange experience because it wasn't raining on the stairs and the sound was weird. But on to number 5, protected stairs. Now this was posted by Von Meowstein about 3 years ago, and they loved wandering in the woods either alone or with friends, and they'd come across stairs every often, not really thinking much of it. Then one time they were out looking with friends and came upon a dog that looked kind of like a wolf, aka a husky, and it was sitting by a set of stairs. And so the writer of this story approaches the dog that turns out to be friendly, but then wants to check out the stairs to see if there's any puppies, like I'd do that. But the thing is, when they do this, the husky tries to nudge them back to their group. And at the time, they thought this was the possibility of the dog trying to get some food from them, but on second thought, maybe it was a warning away from the stairs. They kind of left kind of confused, but if anything, the dog was protecting them. But on to number 4, survival stairs. Redditor Nizagard posted their own story about when they were on an island southeast of Alaska on an army survival test. Having few supplies, living in like a dense forest and living off nature, he came across a random staircase in the middle of this dense forest. His army buddies write off this account of this experience because he was out alone in the wood for 3 days, but he swears he saw this. A staircase that was perfectly clean, just stark in the middle of the forest, no fallen leaves on it or anything. Then there was a strange feeling telling him not to investigate it when he puts his feet up on the staircase. Then he feels nauseous as the sounds around him fade away, something we've heard before, and then he snaps out of it, running far away without looking back. He says it freaks him out to this day, and it was an experience that came out of nowhere, and then now still, no one believes him. I feel like a lot of people are getting the nauseous in the sounds. But let's see where it leads with number 3, stairs lead to fall. Now this is from a deleted account, but a pair of people found remnants of an old house that must have been around from the 50s or the 60s, and the house was gone, but some furniture remained, plus an eerie metal staircase. So this guy that found it, plus his friend Matt, found it weird too, because there was like moss winding around it and some green mold, but Matt decided to check it out. This story goes downhill from here. Matt made it to the top, but when he got there, he became so nauseous that he threw up and fell from the top of the stairs. Although it was about an 8-foot drop, Matt let out a scream because it turns out he had gruesomely broken his leg. After some quick first aid, the two noticed the woods became silent, except for a scream similar to the one Matt let out when he fell, heard further away. Then it was closer, and it had a lower tone and a kind of sound like it was wheezing. So they got up to start to leave, and there it was again, the wheezing scream, maybe 30 feet away, and then they tried to move as fast as they could. The screams from then on became more distant until they were finally out of the woods and able to get Matt some needed medical attention. But the person who wrote this said they moved away since then and warned people to stay away from things that make them feel off. So that's not an experience you want to have, really. On to number 2, stairs all the way down. Now, Redditor NebR_stairs from 4 years ago made their account just to talk about their stairs they found southeast in Nebraska. They were with some friends investigating the ruins of an abandoned farm, and they discovered a staircase going down. A lot of them we see are going up, and they say it was separate from the house ruins there, made out of brick, well engineered, and the group walked down for at least 3 flights of stairs with this horrible sense of dread. They described it as time slipping, sounds going away, and their flashlights going in and out. And they said that the stairs continued further down the 3 flights, but water limited the rest of their descent down, so who knows how far down they could go. But on to number 1, Amazon stairs. And this was from V838 on Reddit. So this is a story from a commenter's grandma that lived in an indigenous community in the Amazon long ago. Now, people tended to get lost around the area, including this story that her grandma told about an old man. He left to go check on the fishing nets in the river but was lost for 2 weeks, only found after women doing their laundry in the river found him trying to empty water out of a canoe with a bowl while it was raining. Now, the older man said that when he was out he saw a set of stairs in the forest and climbed them. Then he only remembers being in that canoe out in the water for 2 hours, but he was missing for 2 weeks. People had been looking for him and had been to that area. And then another thing, he said he was taking out water from the canoe because there was a hole in it, but that's not the case. There were no holes apparently, and yes, there was water, but that's because it was raining. And he had begun to damage the wood in the canoe from dragging the bowl he was using across the same area, so how long was he really out there? What happened with the staircase? I want to know. It's just weird, man, you know? It's kind of weird. Starting at number 10, Army Base Stairs. From Reddit user IronBoy21, 3 months ago, they shared their own story. This one is not in the woods, but I say it's a chilling story about stairs nonetheless. This user was on a North American Treaty Organization deployment, or NATO deployment, with the army, and they were the person that sticks their head out of the hatch to look around while someone else is driving a tank. Now, while driving through a huge open field, they spot a staircase and decide to stop because it looks like it'll lead to a crawl space and it seems cool enough to check out basically. They stop and approach it and find some strange markings on the staircase. And then at this point, we know I'd be running, like turning around and running for it, but this group decides now we're gonna go check it out. And well, they get inside this strange little space that's big enough for maybe 3 people and find more strange markings, and they find human bones. The person who wrote this thinks a family hiding from war might have hidden in the cellar, but they still think it's odd since it's the only house for at least 100 miles around, since it's in an army training area. And then they end the passage with 3 little words. So, I don't know. They just don't know what happened. But from that mystery, let's move on to number 9. Island Forest Stairs. This is from Coated Lemons on Reddit about 3 months ago as well. They were on an Ohio camping trip up to Lake Erie on a small unknown island a friend told them about. So he sets up camp to eat and like hang out and then decides I'm gonna explore the island a bit before it gets dark. 10 minutes in, he finds a structure that he investigates to find it's a stone staircase, but there's no indication that the stairs are remains from a house. There's no rotting wooden structures, no bricks, nothing of the sort. So at that point he felt nothing odd and he was like, and I quote, "Hell yeah, gonna go back to the tent, read a book." But that's when his mood shifted. He got a horrible wave of anxiety and that he should run back to safety. But then again, he thought about the stairs. Then he felt compelled to go to them with his mind in a fog. He said, "It was like a wave of indifference and curiosity washed over me and I had this compulsion to go to them. I drifted over to the bottom, staring at the top. I was staring like a zombie, slowly walking up 2 steps at a time. I felt catatonic. I felt so out of it, so mentally blank, like something in me completely took over and I just acted out of primal steps. I was 3/4 of the way up when I snapped out of it and I ran. I ran as fast as I could. I felt so scared, like in my chest I was tearing up. I was running for my goddamn life." And so after that scary incident I just recounted, he got so mixed up with directions he ended up back at the stairs, freaked out again, and then ran again and somehow made it back to his tent. Then even more weird stuff happened that night, but to keep us on track with stairs, I'll just let you know that once he left, he came back again to the same island with a friend and they searched the entire island but could never find those stairs again. So the mysterious stairs that gave that crazy feeling, who knows where they went. At number 8, Staircase Creek. This next story is from Redditor Ciavri from a while back, and when she was younger she would go hiking in the woods in California, and one time she had a really trippy experience. She was a little lost admittedly and found a creek so that she could follow it downstream because it's recommended that if you're lost, follow the path of water downstream if you're lost. And at some point she had to step into the water to like follow the creek because the sides of the creek were too high, and one of those times she found herself walking down moss-covered stairs. She couldn't really see the bottom of where they went and was nearly slipping due to the water running over the mossy steps. But then, even though it was around noon, the sky turned dark and everything went quiet. This is when she truly tripped and fell, and she says she fell into the dark. She woke up alone in a meadow with marks on her arms with no trace of the staircase or the stream. So the staircase and her just kind of got mixed up. I don't know. But on to number 7.
Next up at number 7 now we have the Screaming Woods. This forest lies just outside of Pluckley, said to be the most haunted village in Britain. The woods get their name because of the blood-curdling screams locals hear from the forest late at night. They say it's haunted by a highwayman who was captured by the villagers hundreds of years ago. They dragged the criminal into the woods, pinned him to a tree, and killed him with a sword. He screamed as he fell to his death. Visitors come from all over to experience the paranormal goings on there. I found a story from a recent visitor that went like this. I was in Pluckley and a group of friends and I decided to go to Deering Woods. When we got there was birds singing and the atmosphere seemed quite happy. We got out the car and my friend noticed that the birds had stopped singing as we went into the woods. You could have heard a pin drop as we walked in up to halfway towards the crossroads, and us girls decided to come out, so we went into the car and the boys went back in. About 20 minutes later, the boys came running out. They got in the car, started it, and turned it head on to the woods where my friend's brand new car had stalled. We saw this black mist coming towards us as if it was walking down the path. There was definitely something there. We then went down to the Black Horse pub where we discussed the day's ghost hunt, and the boys said it was only when they started getting close to the crossroads that it appeared, so they ran out. We have talked to a few of the local people who have said that early in the morning you can hear screaming coming from the woods. Next up at number 6 now, we have The Thing. This one comes from Surly Vet. He said his friend was deer hunting once in the mountains of Virginia back in the 1990s. One winter morning he set out with his gun to a tree stand. It was still very dark when he arrived, and so he climbed up and waited until dawn. While he was waiting, he decided to reverse the batteries in his flashlight. He had an issue with the switch and thought this might fix it. Suddenly though, he was disturbed by a chill running down his spine. Out of nowhere, he began to feel a crippling fear and a feeling of being watched. He was thinking about climbing down from the tree stand and walking back to his truck when he heard a blood-curdling scream at the base of his tree, along with scratches and rustling in the bushes. He fumbled for his flashlight and cursed himself for messing around with the batteries then. He said the thing that was down there was able to elicit a fear in him like nothing he'd ever experienced. Before that, he'd always felt very calm with a gun and confident that he could handle any animal out there. This time though, he was filled with horror and dread. The thing screamed, shrieked and scratched for 15 minutes and then total silence. Not once did he see anything. When he came down a few hours later, he packed up and left the area. He has never been hunting again. Moving on to number 5 now, we have The Rope. This one was first told by Rodat on Reddit. He wrote a brilliant first-hand account which I'll read for you now. Me and my friends thought it would be a great idea to share a few drinks on the side of a dark and unfrequented mountain road at 2 in the morning when everyone should be asleep and no one would bother our drunken boisterousness. Where I grew up, it's very common to go around on motorcycles, not the speedy racing types, but the more commercial 150cc variety. It's also very common to ride these motorcycles without helmets, and the weather usually calls for just a light windbreaker, even on very dark nights on lonely roads such as the one we were on. After distancing ourselves sufficiently from civilization as it was, we parked by the side of the road under a tree. I should mention there was a dim glow emanated by the moon, and our eyes quickly adjusted to the darkness enough to see each other. Another thing worth mentioning is that this road led to an army encampment several kilometers away, so the only sort of people that would potentially drive by us were tough army folk. It was now 10 minutes past, and we were having a good time when we see headlights creeping up towards us. We ignore them because we were all well sheltered from the pavement, sitting under a large tree whose branches grew wide and provided a good deal of cover. The headlights belonged to a Jeep that zoomed past us and suddenly came to a halt. They see us. This was terrifying because here we are, drunk as college students usually are, on bikes without helmets at 3 a.m. on a winding mountain road. But our fear was slightly alleviated as the car drove away. Still, why stop at all? They joked and said that the guy probably saw there was 4 of us and 1 of them. Ha ha ha, loser. Some more time passes. A second pair of headlights belonging to another car drives past us, stops and then leaves. At this point we were getting more and more sober and more worried, so we decided to call it a night and head home. We get on our bikes and start riding back when one of us realizes he's left his backpack under the tree, so we turn around to cover those 3 to 4 kilometers to where we were. As we approach the tree, the backpack owner dismounts while we turn the bikes around. One of our headlights sweeps an intensely bright beam across the branches of the tree. As it points to the branches just above where we were sitting, in a flash we witness, illuminated in stark contrast to the background darkness, a human body hanging by a rope. It had been there the whole time. Now we know why the cars were stopping, and we drove on. Next up at number 4 now, we have Sally in the Wood. Just outside of Bath in the UK, you will find some woods that many locals dare not go near. It's a patch of woodland known simply as Sally in the Wood. Supposedly it's haunted by the ghost of a murdered girl. They say that birds in the woods there cannot sing. Drivers have reported hearing a child scream from the darkness, and some swear they see the ghost of a young girl running out into the road. Legend says that Sally, the murdered girl, haunts the woods at night. She causes cars to crash on the unlit stretch of road where she comes out from behind the trees. They say she was a gypsy girl, supposedly imprisoned in the 18th century. She was locked up in a tower without food and water, left to die inside the woods. Others say she was a local witch who lived to be 100 years old and now continues to torment others in death. Locals say that she may be dead, but her chilling stories live on. Coming in at number 3 now, we have the cougar. This one comes from Reddit user Smokey the Marshmallow. He said the scariest experience he had as a park ranger in Washington State was being stalked by a cougar for a day and a half. One day she was hiking up an old trail when she had the creepy feeling of being watched. That night she camped at a shelter made of 3 walls and a roof. One side was completely open. At one point, she even put her emergency foil tarp around her sleeping bag so that she could hear anything stepping around her. The next day, she found fresh cougar feces and scratches on trees on the trail that she had just hiked on. About a mile past the shelter, she found a half-eaten deer in a brush off the trail. That's when she knew that a cougar was nearby and that it was stalking her. The last 2 hours of hiking through the dense forest were the most hair-raising of any hike she had been on. Next up at number 2 now, we have The Visitor. Some of you guys may have heard me talk about this story in another video, but it's too good to leave off the list. It comes from Senior Puffy Pants. I still remember that name. He said he was once leading a group of school kids up Mount Sterling in North Carolina. They were camping at the top of the mountain on a beautiful night with a full moon. The kids and the other guide went to bed in their tents. He chose to sleep in a hammock outside. He lay there reading his book until 10:30 p.m. when he decided to go to sleep. The moon was so bright that it lit up the trail they had just climbed up on. As he was drifting off to sleep, he saw something move on the trail. As he looked closer, he noticed it was a person. They were in the middle of nowhere, and there was someone hiking up the trail towards them with no headlamp on or any gear. He froze as the person moved closer towards the camp. They arrived at the top of the mountain and then stopped in their tracks. It was a man. He sat there in a way that looked like he wasn't trying to sleep. He was just watching them. The guide was terrified. He stared back at the man. They stared at each other. This went on for hours and hours. Then, at 3:30 in the morning, the man stood up. He took a moment to survey the camp, a few minutes longer, and then went back down the trail they had all come up on. To this day, he has no idea who the man was, what he wanted, and why exactly he was staring at them. And finally, number 1 now, we have the Goblin. This one comes from Reddit user Justin F. 100,000. He said this one happened about 8 years ago. He was working as a camp counselor for Camp Tommy in New York State. He was staying in some cabins at the top of the mountain, each one separated by about half a mile. One night, at about 1 a.m., he was sneaking off to meet his girlfriend in another cabin. He decided to cut through the forest to speed up the journey. Suddenly, he heard a rustling in the woods, and he stopped to investigate it. There are big animals that live in those woods, so he was expecting to see something like that. A bear, perhaps. All of a sudden, though, this 3-foot-tall humanoid thing jumped out of the bushes and just looked at him. It was too dark to make out any real features, but it definitely had 2 feet, 2 arms, and basically looked just like a person, but tiny. He was curious and walked towards it. He spooked the thing and it bolted back out into the woods. It ran stiffly but was very, very quick. To this day, he has no idea what the creature was, although everyone seems to have their own theories.
Starting us off at number 10 is a classic witch. First up, we have a story from Louis92, and they start off by explaining that their grandfather used to be a rancher in Mexico, and that this was a story he used to tell often when they were young. Quote, one day he said he was patrolling this ranch late at night and he heard a baby crying. Now, the land is pretty flat, so he looked all ways and saw nothing. Maybe some goats out in the far distance, since they sound like crying babies. As he's walking his route, he hears the same sound, looks up in the sky, and he swears he saw a witch with black clothing and everything flying towards a mountain. He panicked, ran to his car, and drove off as fast as he could. I mean, no kidding. If I saw a witch riding a broom in the sky while I was alone at night, I would definitely be freaked out too. Moving on to number 9, a coven. Next up is a story posted to Reddit about 9 years ago from Astrius94, and it would definitely freak me out to say the least. Quote, about 5 years ago, me and my friends were just messing around in a smallish local forest. Basically, we saw in the distance, in a little forest clearing, a group of 4, 5, 6-ish people, what looked like to be wearing black hooded robes, sitting together on the ground quietly. I know it seems
seems typical, but there was no normal reason for anyone to be dressed like that in the middle of a forest. We just all freaked out and ran after watching for about 20 seconds. I still remember the image of them sitting there vividly all these years later. Coming in at number 8, a psychic witch. This next one comes from Reddit user Bubblegum Scent, and they begin by explaining she knew a woman who lived in the middle of nowhere, really far from town. She went to her one day with her mom. Quote, this woman was eerie, that energy that also scares you because you think she can see through you, but there was nothing wrong with her face or hair or anything. She was average looking, except for her gold grills all around her mouth. She first did a ritual with water and green leaves from a mango tree on us, chanting some stuff we didn't understand and passing these leaves in the fire. She said she needed to clean us of energy from the outside. Reddit friend explains that she's a very private person, so she hadn't shared any details with the woman when she arrived, but when this witch opened her cards, Reddit friend freaked out. Quote, this woman opened her cards and she saw and pointed out skin color, height, eye color, and profession of every single love interest in my life at the time, and which ones were in love and others which were badly intentioned. I was spooked the whole time. This woman knew about travels and work prospects and everything. It was scary.
At number 7 we have strange howling. Canada has endless forests that go on forever in every direction. There could be anything lurking inside them. There's everything from things that are deadly to things that are pure and innocent. And this mystery howling could be either. Based on what I can hear in this video, I'm going to lean towards dangerous. It's unknown what could be making those noises. Some wildlife experts think it could be some sort of large animal, but that kind of behavior is very unusual. There are those videos where cats try to impersonate dogs, and this could be one of those. Just a different animal like a mountain lion trying to impersonate a wolf or something, or maybe trying to impersonate fear itself. At number 6 we have more howling. It seems like terrifying howling coming from the deep dark woods is a lot more normal than we thought, but it doesn't make it any less scary. We have some more footage from a separate incident in Wisconsin. It's thought that it could be some sort of wounded animal crying out for help. It sounds like it could maybe be a wolf. Let's check it out. That is enough to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. This video sounds a little bit more animalistic than the last, but what kind of creature could make that noise? If it is a wolf, what could be lurking in the woods that is so powerful and threatening that it could make a wolf cry out in fear like that? At number 5 we have an unexpected guest. You're hiking through the woods and you expect to see some nice birds, maybe a cute family of squirrels, but you forget that there's also a bunch of animals that live in the woods that would gladly eat you.
There's a mountain lion right here.
Holy crap, this guy had one of the top predators in the forest just walking up on him like it was nobody's business. This thing has no fear, and this is a few minutes into the video. This cougar has been following him for a while. He stands his ground and tries to get the beast to flee, and I guess the big boy was a little camera shy because he eventually turns and leaves. This guy got very lucky. I feel like those things don't usually turn and run tail. If they want to come at you, then you are done for. Unless you're this guy who killed a mountain lion with his bare hands.
It really clicked after I hit it in the head with a rock and it still didn't release my wrist. That at that point, more drastic measures were necessary.
At number 4 we have more screaming. Even more screaming. Che, how many screaming videos are you going to include on this list? Well, I had to include this one because it seems like it could be some sort of ape-like creature screaming from the woods, so it could be a Bigfoot, and you can't have a list of scary things caught on video in a forest or in the woods without Bigfoot stuff. It's so necessary. I mean, it could be anything, but that doesn't sound like any sort of animal I've ever heard. Some people have made claims that it could be a howler monkey, but the video was taken in Georgia and there ain't no howler monkeys in Georgia, I'll tell you that much. At number 3, we have a man in the woods. If you spend a night in an abandoned hotel in the middle of the woods, there's a good chance that you're going to run into some sort of weird stuff that'll make you want to pee your pants. This was the plan of German YouTubers Unearthly. They wanted to do something spooky for their fans. The footage was pretty creepy, and after they uploaded it, their fans found a little Easter egg. I don't know if you guys saw what was lurking in the shadows, but there was a man standing there, and they didn't notice that he was there until after they uploaded the video. Some people saw it and then highlighted it to the YouTubers. So who is this dude and why was he just following them in the woods? At number 2, we have Midnight Terror. So much of what happens in this video is horrifying. It's from the YouTube channel called MindCTV, and they decide to go find a bunch of condemned buildings in the middle of the forest in the middle of the night. Let's just go down the list of things that happen. First, someone starts following them as they're walking through the woods. You never see this person, but you can hear them whistling and you can hear their footsteps. Next, they hear this mystery stalker get very close to them, and they actually set up some bell tripwires, and the guy trips over them and they hear the bells ringing. Then they find the building, they go inside, and then they use this device to communicate with ghosts. This whole adventure is just one giant nope for me. I don't want anything to do with this, and I never want to hang out with these guys. Oh my god, they just seem like they attract terror or something. I don't like it. And for the number 1 spot, we have a horror scene. A hiker was walking through the woods. He follows a trail that leads to what seems to be some sort of small campsite set up in the middle of the woods. What he finds is very bizarre, unexplained, and terrifying. On several of the trees surrounding this makeshift campsite in the middle of the woods, it looks like there's signs set up. At first, it seems like they could be some sort of wildlife warning, but on closer inspection, you find this, and it's horrifying.
Look what these fucking are.
On all the trees surrounding this area, there are missing person signs. What the hell is going on here? This looks like the scene out of a horror movie. All of these posters are from people who have actually gone missing and haven't been found. The man recording the video keeps filming a little while longer, and then he hears voices coming, so he hightails it out of there before whoever these people are can find him. Once he gets out of this terror scene, he contacts the police and gave them the GPS location that he got from his phone, and the police go to investigate. This entire scene was connected to a nearby property. They claim that it was all decoration for a Halloween party. It was the beginning of October, so it's possible that the signs were connected to some sort of Halloween party, but it seems like they've been up there for a long time. They all have water damage, some of them have holes in them. It is so creepy and so weird.
And we're kicking off this video with stairs. This is something that a lot of you have probably heard of before. There have been many stories and images surfacing online of people, as well as park rangers, coming across stairs in the middle of the forest, leading to some pretty surreal, haunting kind of images. These stairs are often found deep in the woods and can be made of a variety of materials, including concrete and wood. The stairs appear to have been constructed by human hands and appear to be in rather good condition, even though they are often located in areas where there are no buildings or signs of human activity. A supposed paranormal stories surrounding these stairs suggest that they are haunted or cursed, and that those who climb them are doomed to a terrible fate. Some claim that the stairs are remnants of long abandoned structures, while others believe that they are portals to other dimensions or the work of supernatural entities. And I gotta say, I mean, just seeing stairs in the middle of a forest, that would be pretty eerie for me too. I'd be just a little bit freaked out. The search for the missing teens. Reddit user Genesis Pro Tech shared this story. There had been a group of teenagers who went on a camping trip but did not return at the scheduled time. Worried about their safety, Genesis Pro Tech and his good friend, along with a search and rescue professional who knew the area well, were called to assist with the search efforts. After hiking for most of the day and covering about 35 kilometers into the woods, the search party began to notice some strange things. They came across sticks that were carved into spears and stuck in the ground, odd carvings on the trees, and a child's stuffed animal hanging from a tree. These items were all freshly carved, indicating that someone had been in the area recently. The thing is, this wasn't on any of the regular trails in the area, and it was far from any roads. Despite their growing unease, the search party continued to hike through the woods, hoping to find the missing teenagers. As night fell, they set up camp, still on edge from the unsettling things they'd seen earlier, and after a restless night, they woke up at dawn and prepared to continue the search. While packing up the gear though, they found a piece of ripped clothing and some shoe prints nearby. They thought, hey, maybe they were close to finding the missing teens. But then they received a radio call that the teenagers had been found about 20 kilometers away to the east, and that they were calling the search party back. They were pretty relieved about the teens being found, but understandably shaken at the same time. What was all that stuff they'd come across in the middle of nowhere? Next up, we have Stalked by a Cougar. A Redditor by the name of Smokey the Marshmallow shared what they described as the scariest incident they had experienced as a park ranger. In Washington state, the ranger had been hiking up an unpopular trail leading to an old shelter where he had a strange feeling he was being watched. Although he had seen fresh cougar scratches and droppings along the trail, which were common in the area, he wasn't worried at first. That night, he camped at the shelter, which had only 3 walls and a roof. He felt a little uneasy throughout the night and didn't sleep much. In an attempt to feel safer, he arranged his emergency foil tarp around his sleeping bag, hoping to hear something if it approached him as he slept. The next day, the ranger found fresh cougar droppings and scratches on the trail he had hiked on. He continued on the trail and found a mostly eaten deer in some dense brush just off the trail. This was an indication that this cougar was nearby, and the ranger began to feel pretty uneasy, as you could probably imagine, given he was at least 13 miles away from civilization. As a result, he decided to just shorten his 3-day trip and quickly made his way out of the area. Probably a smart idea.
In our number 7 spot today, we have Leave It to Beaver. This is a story told by a woman who went on an overnight camping trip in the woods with her friends. She set up her tent and they all went to bed, only to be awakened by a really large smack out in the water. Apparently, she said that water carries sound extremely well, so it woke her and her friends up. Her first thought was that it was someone drunk with a gun who was shooting over the lake. Yeah, really? That was your first thought? I would have assumed that it was some criminal with a gun on his way to assassinate me, but I do have a very colorful imagination. After some inspection, it was discovered that it was just a beaver. Yep, a beaver was smacking the water before diving under. Ah, the sounds of the forest that we just don't know anymore because we now all live in a concrete jungle. Well, at least that's a funny story to laugh about afterwards. In our number 6 spot today, we have Heavy Sounds. This Reddit user admits that they are known to hunt, but in this particular case, they weren't hunting in the woods. It was in fact when this person was only 12, and he was looking for bottles in a creek on what he described as a dense, forested hillside. All of a sudden, he heard some pretty heavy footsteps behind him. He described them as slow, and they continued to get heavier and heavier. He felt paralyzed with fear, and he turned around only to see 2 large holes in the ground. A few seconds later, he realized that it was just the neighbor's cow that got out, and the cow's nose was inches from his face. Imagine turning around to be nose to nose with a cow just following you. So cute. I would honestly love that, unless it's a mean cow, but whoever heard of a mean cow? In our number 5 spot today, we have The Red Light. This is a story that happened to a Reddit user's father. Her father had been walking through the woods for a couple of hours when he decided to take a break and sit under a tree for a while. Okay, first off, why would anyone walk through any wood alone for more than an hour? Is that not concerning, like, at all? I get it. For spiritual journeys, perhaps. And maybe it's because I have no muscles and I'm physically defenseless, but still, why? Anyways, our story continues with this girl's dad trying to relax under a tree when a light starts flashing in his eyes. He looked around to see where it was coming from, but he couldn't find the source. He began to get nervous as he saw the red light moved down to his chest. But then he looked around to find the source, and some not so great guy was using a laser and aiming it at him. He yelled at him and started walking towards him, but of course the man ran away. He apparently didn't think it was someone trying to shoot him, but he did consider that someone could be out hunting and perhaps wasn't being careful. Honestly, he must have more faith in humanity, because I would have definitely assumed that. But curious to know what you think. Leave a comment in the comment section below. What would you have thought? In our number 4 spot, we have the hunters. In our next story, a field appraiser had to travel to a rural area in Kansas to take some measurements and photos of a bunch of 20-foot shipping containers that had appeared in the woods out of nowhere in the recent months. As he was inspecting them, he very quickly realized that they were being used as cabins for hunting season. As he was finishing up and on his way back to his car, he looked up to see 2 hunters in full gear, looking like snipers, pointing large rifles at him. Of course, it scared the crap out of him, and when they realized that he was harmless and not an animal, they got really mad at him and super mouthy, and then when they further realized what he was doing, they got even more mad. He tried to quickly finish up and leave because he didn't want to anger them further, but he said he didn't blame them for being annoyed and having their hunting session interrupted. Very understanding of him. In our number 3 spot, we have the rocks. This is a story of a man whom really loves to camp. He goes on a camping trip every year, and so this year was no different. He went to a beautiful area with a ravine in the middle of the forest, and he set up camp. He had a nice day, enjoying the wilderness, and then decided to go to bed. In the middle of the night though, he hears the sounds of rocks moving, but he decides to not think too much of it. When he woke up and left his tent the next morning, he found himself surrounded by a wall of rocks. Someone had built a rock wall around him while he was sleeping. Not knowing whether this was a threat or a joke, he decided to pack up and leave. He said that he had to move some of the rocks aside to make a path, and that wasn't without difficulty. He never went into the forest without protection again. Well, a rock wall sounds like a practical joke to me, but really? A rock wall? Who in their right mind would put that much effort into pranking or scaring a stranger? That's way too much effort. In our number 2 spot, we have the deserted cabin. This is a story of a hunter whom once went deep into the forest in the middle of nowhere, only to stumble upon what looked like an abandoned cabin. The cabin was very run down and not surrounded by water or trails or anything. He and his partner went inside to check it out. They walked through the kitchen and noticed some expired canned food lying on the counter. As they kept looking around, they began noticing some pretty dark things. Satanic symbols on the walls, a really weird painting with the words "His day will come" on it, and all kinds of books on magic and rituals. They saw a ton of flies surrounding the fridge and what looked like blood drops on the handle, and then they got so spooked that they agreed that it was time to leave. As they were walking outside of the house, they saw a campfire that had been ignited, and they immediately made a run for it. After much reflection, they are convinced that the owner was just hiding in the house, and they would have had seconds to live had they not discovered the fire. Terrifying. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the clown. This is a story told by a girl who was having a very anxious day, and so she decided to go get some fresh air and walk through the woods. She had a bad fight with her boyfriend, and as she was walking through the woods, she reflected on the fight and started crying. She heard a voice behind her that said, "Why are you crying?" She jumped and immediately turned around and saw a clown smiling so big right behind her. Instantly terrified to be alone in the woods with a clown, she told the clown that she was just having a bad day and "Thanks for asking." Fear began to flood through her as she politely said goodbye and began to walk towards where her car was parked. The clown began to walk too and asked if he could help in any way. She anxiously told him no, that's okay, and started to walk faster. 1 second later, she heard her boyfriend calling to her, "Rachel, what are you doing?" Immediate relief flooded through her as she ran towards her boyfriend and gave him a hug. She turned around and the clown was gone. She's pretty positive that she would have been a goner if her boyfriend hadn't showed up. Well, that's terrifying and definitely makes me never want to go through the woods ever again. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the skeleton. This particular Reddit user worked in the woods for a living, so he had come across many random things in his time. On this particular occasion though, he was quite spooked. He was walking through the woods when he saw a full skeleton of a cow tied together by twigs and twine sitting on a log. Yes, Whoever made it placed it so that it was sitting on a log. Then they also put a neat pile of bones in front of it. I'm sorry, come again? Somebody had taken the bones of a cow and decided to make a craft project out of it. Whew, terrifying. He said that he almost fainted. He went on to comment about how odd it was, considering they were so far off the road. But sir, I would have to argue that it was odd because it was a cow skeleton tied together, sitting on a log. No explanation necessary. Totally creepy. In our number 9 spot we have the lab. In this story, a guy was walking through the woods, scouting for a hunting spot. As he was walking, without even realizing what he stumbled upon, he walked straight up to a tent where illegal substances were being made. A type of lab, if you will. The second he realized this, he skedaddled. When he was reflecting later, he thought that the smell should have been a dead giveaway. He didn't even realize until he was standing in front of it looking at a bunch of garbage under camo tarps. To be fair, I think a lot of people would have been slow to process this. It's not every day that you stumble across this in the woods. And this encounter though is terrifying, to either be caught by the cops near or to be found by the owner, because they might be crazy and may try to do something rash in order to protect themselves. In our number 8 spot we have the 3 bears. This story seems like a retelling of the 3 little bears, without the hot and cold porridge and, you know, the cute hard and soft beds. My favorite part. This is the story of a Reddit user who was walking in the woods one day when he had the strangest feeling that he was being watched. He suddenly began to get a little paranoid, and so his pace quickened as he walked toward where the park warden was parked. When he was about 100 meters from the car, he turned around to yet again check if he was being followed. This time, panic went through him as he saw 3 bears smacking his stuff around. One of the bears was standing up in the middle of the road, just staring at him. He never finished the story of how he got out of that pickle, but clearly he did, otherwise I'm sure he wouldn't have been able to make that Reddit post. I was kinda hoping he would have finished the story by talking about his golden locks, but alas, humans always let me down.
Coming in at number 7, Manchek Swamp. During the 1860s, Julia Brown was a well-respected healer and midwife who resided in a small village called Frenye. At first, she loved caring for her village, but after some time she started to feel disrespected by her community, feeling as though they were taking her gifts for granted. Julia began scaring the village, telling them dooming predictions about their impending deaths, and the townspeople, unsure if she was placing a curse or foretelling their future, became very troubled. Shortly before her own death, she said, "One day I'm gonna die and I'm gonna take you all with me." And just days after she was buried, 3 entire villages were destroyed by a hurricane and hundreds of lives were lost. To this day, many believe the spirit of Julia Brown haunts the swamp, and visitors who have visited report hearing blood-curdling screams and the sound of her voice singing cryptic and frightening songs, terrifying all those who walk by. Coming in at number 6, Alice's grave. Alice died in the 19th century, and although she led a fairly normal life while alive, her death and afterlife were anything but. She was laid to rest in an above-ground grave, but soon after, many of the townspeople began to question, was Alice a witch? It said in the middle of the night, the large slab of marble covering her grave was removed on 3 separate occasions, and each time her remains were left outside of her grave. No one stepped forward admitting to have moved Alice or the slab, which led the people to believe that Alice was a witch trying to escape her grave and haunt the town. Eventually, large, heavy iron bars were placed over the grave in an attempt to hold her spirit inside, but this hasn't seemed to stop her, as locals claim you can still see her wandering the wooded cemetery at night. But just exactly what is she looking for? That is one of the many unanswered questions that leave visitors terrified, unsure if she comes in peace or if she is out for revenge. Moving on to number 5. Bell Witch Cave. One of the most well-known haunted locations, the tales of it being haunted by an evil entity go back as far as the early 1800s and have been very well documented throughout the years. As the story goes, sometime in the late 16th century, there was a huge feud between 2 neighbors, John Bell and Kate bats. Now, Kate believed that John had cheated her somehow on a land deal, and so to seek revenge would routinely harm his daughter. This of course made John act out, and the two spent most of their lives trying to get back at one another. In fact, she was so hell-bent on revenge that the feud even lasted until her very dying breath. On her deathbed, Kate, who was believed by all in the town to be a witch, allegedly cursed the entire Bell family and promised she would haunt them for the rest of eternity. Ever since that day, a terrifying entity is said to haunt the cave. Even Andrew Jackson, former president who spent a night there, once famously said, "I would rather face the entire British Army than to spend another night with the Bell Witch." Coming in at number 4, a satanic idol. In 1991, a hunter was walking through the woods on the lookout for deer when he began to feel an overwhelming sense of paranoia. At that very moment, he turned around to see this creepy doll leaned up against a tree staring at him, and he could have sworn that it appeared out of nowhere. Immediately, the hunter knew he should not be here, and so he began walking as quickly as he could to find a way out of the forest. Then, suddenly, an old man dressed in black robes appeared beside him. He looked like a priest, the hunter thought, but something wasn't quite right. Every step he took, the priest matched him, but eventually he decided to ask the priest how to get out of the forest. Creepily, the priest did not speak, instead just pointed off into another direction, turned around, and left the man alone. Now, luckily, the hunter escaped, and the following day, after telling his friends the strange events, they suggested that he reach out to Ed and Lorraine Warren. Upon telling them his story, they explained that the priest was actually a well-known member of a satanic cult, and that the creepy doll he encountered was actually an idol used for ritual purposes. Then the Warrens, being who they were, ventured back into the forest, found the doll, and brought it back home. Soon after, however, strange things began happening. Allegedly, one time Ed was speaking with Lorraine, turned away for a second, looked back, and she was suddenly 30 feet away and passed out on the ground. He called the ambulance, and she spent the next 3 days in hospital, in and out of consciousness, and according to Ed, she actually levitated. Moving on to number 3. Bear Walker. Next up is a story from a now deleted Reddit account about the time they came into contact with a bear walker, which in indigenous cultures is depicted as an evil sorcerer who uses sacred medicines for evil. According to our friend here, quote, "I was 20 years old and very healthy. One night I had a dream I was in a field and was picking wildflowers. From each direction a tornado was coming at me. I woke up in a fevered sweat. That began 2 months of sheer misery. My doctor kept saying that I had a UTI, she would give me antibiotics, and it would subside for a while. I lost 40 pounds in the span of 2 months. By the end of it, I couldn't walk and barely ate." Reddit user says her family grew concerned and convinced her to go to a hospital, and after an ultrasound, they found a huge growth on her ovary. The user continues, quote, "A few days later, I had surgery, and when the doctor came to visit me, he said he had never seen anything like it. It was a yellow, almost concrete-like substance around my ovary. I got better, but my mother remained unconvinced and scheduled an appointment with a medicine man. According to Reddit user, the medicine man said a woman saw her at a powwow, became interested in who she was because of her mother, and must have thrown a piece of medicine in the path which she stepped on. Quote, he asked me if I still felt it. I said yes. He took a bone, what kind I'm not sure, placed it in the area and began to suck. He started vomiting yellow. He gave me medicines and rituals for my mom to do. I went home that night and slept for 13 hours. My sickness never returned." Coming in at number 2, Lechuza. Our next story comes from Reddit user Zerora, and for reference, a Lechuza is a witch that transforms into an owl. Quote, "I was out at a friend's ranch with my buddy, a cousin of mine, a mutual friend, and my buddy's dad. We were putting up some fence posts and barbed wire so we could corral some stray cattle and keep them there until we found the owner. The sun was setting, so we decided to call it a day. We built a bonfire close by and huddled up in an unfinished ranch hand's house. We were drinking and just shooting the breeze and telling stories from high school. Eventually, we got to stories about the paranormal. Once I got to describing the Lechuza, we heard an ungodly screech, almost ear-piercing. We all turned turn to look in the direction of the screech, and before my eyes can adjust to the darkness, I hear my buddy scream, "Es una lechuza!" and he hauls ass to the main ranch house a few hundred yards away. I turn back towards the darkness and I see a giant silhouette of an owl perched on one of the posts we had driven in earlier that day. It was massive. Scared shitless, I decided to run back to the ranch. I finally reach the ranch house and my buddy's dad demands to know what is going on. Reddit friend tried to calm him down, but eventually decided he would go to check out if the witch was still there. But when he arrived back at the tree it was perched on, the only thing left were giant claw marks. And last up in our number 1 spot, on the trail. Last up is a story from a now deleted Reddit account, but our Reddit friend begins by saying that they used to live in a really small town as a kid and that they would often play on the trails near the forest after school with their friends. Quote, "One day we were walking a trail and a lady in her mid-50s or 60s came out of the woods. She had dirt all over her hands and pants. She said her car broke down and she needed help. We said we would go tell our parents to come help, but she insisted we come into the woods. We said no and kept walking, and she just stared at us. It was like she just shut off as a person when we told her. The smile went away. Even when we were a couple kilometers down the road, we could see her staring at us. Anyways, we get back to my friends and we're playing tag or something in his backyard, and one of us starts making fun of the lady we saw earlier, and out of nowhere he is launched into his parents' shed, breaks the window and his arm. We all stand in shock. His parents come out and start yelling at us, blaming us and saying we threw him. To this day, we all seem to have the same recurring dream or seeing the woman in the woods, except every time I dream it, she is closer and closer to us.